A group of the country's leading scientists will meet in Canberra tomorrow to consider the fate of the koala. The National Threatened Species Scientific Committee is again examining whether the marsupial should be listed as vulnerable to extinction. The Australian Koala Foundation says it has evidence that the population on the mainland has steeply declined in recent years. It estimates there could be as few as 43,000 left. Just a few years ago, there were thought to be hundreds of thousands of koalas in the wild. John Taylor reports from Queensland.
Now then, little cat wants to just sit against you, okay?
Since European settlement, koalas and people have been on a collision course. First hunting, disease and now habitat loss have greatly reduced koala numbers. But there are now fears numbers have reached a critical point.
We're saying it could be as low as 43,000 and as high as 80,000, and that's a lot different to what government thinks.
Deborah Tabart from the Australian Koala Foundation says the koala should be nationally listed as a threatened species. 3 years ago, the National Threatened Species Scientific Committee looked at listing it under the Commonwealth Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. It rejected the nomination, finding that there were likely to be in the order of hundreds of thousands of mature individuals in the wild.
Our teams have been there, we've done long dusty miles, and I'm telling you, the koala's in trouble and our country's in trouble.
Just how much trouble hasn't been agreed upon yet. But a year ago, the federal government ordered a review of the koala's status, believing that its situation probably had changed.
It looks like the figures for koalas aren't as good as I would like. I've asked the Threatened Species Committee to go back and to do that work again.
The head of the Threatened Species Scientific Committee, Professor Beeton, says several thousand pages of documentation were behind the 2006 rejection of the koala. The decision was made despite the United States Fish and Wildlife Service listing the koala as a threatened species because of habitat loss.
We're obliged to make our decisions on the best scientific information available. If they've got scientific information we don't have, we would seek it out and consider it. But the fact that they've made a listing is not something that would persuade us.
Tomorrow in Canberra, Professor Beeton's committee will meet a group of Australia's top koala scientists as it works to make a recommendation by the middle of next year.
We'll spend the day with them talking about this issue of koala numbers, abundance, etc., because we judge under, different criteria. We're interested in whether there's a decline in numbers, whether there's a decline in range, how rapidly those things are occurring, what's the probability of extinction. We're interested in all those things.
Dr. Bill Ellis will be one of the scientists in the room. He's been researching koalas in Queensland for 2 decades.
Well, there's a very clear evidence of major declines in populations across Queensland, and certainly evidence that the same thing's happening in areas of New South Wales. And so the time to review their situation is probably right now.
Dr. Ellis's research has involved capturing koalas and attaching satellite transmitters. He's watched as koala numbers have fallen and his efforts to save populations have failed.
We've had examples of localised extinctions, especially in New South Wales, where there's been long-term projects where people have been looking at koalas and involving community in surveys and getting good support from the community because they're concerned that their koala numbers are dwindling, but they haven't been able to save them, and they have gone extinct.
And I was there a few weeks ago out in the western lands of Queensland, and I really think climate change is starting to affect koala populations. And we had young PhDs out there 10 years ago that estimated maybe 30 or 40,000 koalas. We didn't find one in 6 days. Not one.
Save the koalas. Here's the key. No tree, no meat.
In September, hundreds of people marched through Brisbane calling for greater protection for koalas. Since then, the Queensland government announced that it will spend $15 million to protect land in vulnerable koala habitats in southeast Queensland. But it's not just Australians who care about koalas.
The major threat in this day and age is land clearing. Up to 80% of koala home ranges have been cleared for housing developments and for roads.
Every day, international tourists visit Brisbane's Lone Pine Koala Sanctuary, where the major draw card is the koala. Everything the Australian government does will be watched around the world.
There's a number of species which are charismatic and emotionally charged. We don't consider that. I mean, we'd consider the koala with the same level of diligence and dedication as we would the death adder.
If the koala doesn't get listed, then I have completely lost faith in our legal system. And I think all hell will break loose in some respects, because I think we'll have to ask the international community to step in somehow, some way.
A report from John Taylor.